The Texans went into Minneapolis and did not quite do what we thought they could do. We're going to talk about all that and more on this edition of the Bullpen.
To throw the punches away. He floats one wide open, and there he goes. Touchdown! For a Texan touchdown.
Hello and welcome to the Bullpen. I am James Roy, and as always, with me is Tom Cheveria. Tom, how are you doing today?
Today was not a good day to be a Houston sports fan. Yesterday, totally different. Stroh's got to win. Dash got to win. Dynamo got to win. Today, not so much.
Yeah, it was not the best of games, but I mean, it'll do. I think that the purpose of this game, as we'll discuss throughout the episode, is worth the lesson that it taught the team. But I mean, I obviously don't like watching the Texans lose, so it was not a fun Sunday for me, especially with the Astros not coming through. There was a lot of things that didn't come through. It was not a great Sunday. Much more fun to come to y'all with a victory Monday for sure. But let's talk about it. Let's talk about this game. Before we start, you're here. This is a Texans podcast. You know that. But if you're not subscribed, you should be. And if you're watching it, you can listen to it wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening to it and you'd rather see our shining, beautiful faces while we talk Texans with you, you can find us on YouTube at The Bullpen Cast is the YouTube channel. With that out of the way, let's talk about it. As much as I don't want to, we're going to get into it. As we always do, we'll start with CJ. What do you make of CJ's performance, and what factors around it do you think affected it being maybe not what we wanted it to be?
So first off, I feel like there's a lot of things I'm going to say, and it might rub people the wrong way. But I mean, we're trying to be critical of this team, and when you think about the way we started the season, came into the season, could do no wrong, right? Defense was going to be shut down. Offense was going to score all the points. Texans were just going to steamroll teams left and right. At no point in time did I feel like this team was going to go 17-0. I knew there was going to be a game that was lackluster. And I think this game was lackluster all across the board. We're pretty proud. We have every reason to be of CJ Stroud and what he's been able to do. And I think, he has been such a great thing for this team that we almost don't want to critique him, right? We kind of want to don't want to go there. But I felt like as far as CJ Stroud goes, this is probably one of his more lackluster performances that I've seen him in a Texans uniform. Obviously, the first and I don't know how you want to curtail this, if we just want to talk about it or whatever. But the first interception I don't put on CJ. I think maybe he could have went somewhere else with the ball, but tips happen, that kind of thing. The second one was definitely on him. I think he held on to the football a little long, and we love that about him. That's something that makes him great. But on a day where the offensive line clearly was struggling, I think he needed to check into some things to help with protection. I think he needed to check down a little bit more to just use the outlet valves to force the defense to respect that. And I think there was just some longer plays that they were trying to get accomplished. And it just never worked out because the longer CJ held on to the football, the more it kind of fed into the defense. They were clearly not respecting the run. They clearly weren't respecting, anything of the short, intermediate pass range, because, I mean, the plays that they were able to get to Stephon Diggs, I felt like they were there all game if they wanted them. And they were just trying to move the ball around a little bit, further down the field, try to get big chunks, explosives. And this defense that the Minnesota Vikings has just is a really good, well-coached team. I really think that they had a really good game plan, and they definitely outcoached the Houston Texans.
Kudos to the Vikings. I agree with you on that. I think we caught it, at least. Like, I think we set our expectations more reasonably, just looking at how the first 2 weeks of the season went for the Vikings. what Brian Flores put together on the defensive side of the ball and what Sam Darnold was doing with Justin Jefferson. And we kind of said, we think this will be close. And the Vikings definitely proved that wasn't the case. But I think that the game overall is important to, you have that, like, I look back at in 2008 when the Gators lost to Ole Miss and Tim Tebow gave that, I promise that you'll never see anyone work harder. Like those kind of losses, like, fuel the team and remind you that, hey, I think maybe they were riding a high. They were like, well, we added all this talent. We are a great team and we can win. And this was an important step. To speak to CJ's performance, I think that a lot of it can be pinned on offensive game planning. I'm not going to go as far as some people. I mean, I don't know if you've been on Twitter or social media at all. There's people calling for Bobby Slowick's job and saying, well, I knew it all along. These same people that talked all offseason about how great it was that Bobby Slowick stayed are like, well, 3 games into this season, I knew all along that Bobby Slowick is not it. And it's like, no, you didn't. I will say I'm kind of concerned that maybe Bobby Slowick probably should have made a better choice and rode the head coaching wave while he had it. But it's 3 games into the season. I'm not going to say that that's over either. But the requirement of a lot of these plays was long developing, and so the only times that CJ Stroud was able to get the ball out of the backfield quickly was when he was under pressure, and he had to, which meant that the play had not developed to the extent it needed to for CJ to have the play. He was making it up as he went, essentially, because he was having to try and find a guy before the play had developed to the point where it needed to, and that was a common theme throughout the game. And I think that is one of the major things that held the Texans back, outside of the fact that the running back room is really just Cam Akers. And, they weren't exactly, the offensive line also just was not really playing. Like, if you're going to have these long developing plays, if you're going to try and use the run game to give CJ some time, that it has to be respected. And the offensive line is where you get that respect in the trenches, and it just didn't happen. So I think that in a lot of ways, CJ was set up for failure. I also understand that CJ, as the leader of this team, was always going to take the blame, at least when asked about it. When he did his presser, he said, and that him and D'Amico said it, which shows a cultural, expectation where they were both like, and at the end of the day, it falls on me, and they both understand that. And that leads into my next question for you, which is that Titus Howard had an awful, no good, just absolutely trash game. There was some of those pre-snap calls you could say are due to this new obsession the NFL has with, tackles lining up in the backfield and enforcing that for some unknown reason. I think that's ruining football, but that's a whole nother topic. Outside of that, not Titus Howard. Did I say Titus Howard? Laramie Tunsil. I don't know why anyway, tackle play was not great, but I'm looking at Laramie Tunsil here. I don't like doing this, as you know, but I have done it in the past with, Jalen Petrie when I see something and say something. So, and I said as much on Twitter. Someone called me out and said, "Why don't you tag him?" I replied with, I replied and I said at Laramie Tunsil, because I don't care if he sees it. He's probably seeing everyone else say it, so it's whatever. But Laramie Tunsil, not a great day. And then to add insult to injury, when asked about it afterwards, kind of half took accountability, half said, he said, "I take accountability." And then every word he said after "I take accountability" basically said, "I actually don't, though." And it was actually not my fault. What do you make of his performance, and what do you make of the way that he handled himself after basically, I mean, there's no other way to put it, basically screwing the team out of all of their good plays? You can basically look at, Laramie Tunsil and say, yeah, that 5-yard penalty means a lot more because Tank Dell had a really good catch. There was a lot of great plays that probably could have shifted the momentum of the game that got negated by penalties by Laramie Tunsil. So what are your thoughts?
So Laramie Tunsil was a good left tackle. I'm going to start there. I know that, today nobody feels that way. And I know normally, you get one of these penalties from Laramie Tunsil and you just accept it. I made the comparison a few different times recently to the way Jose Altuve runs the bases. It's not always the best. And when he does it, you just understand that that's something that comes with Jose Altuve. You take all of the good and you take this one bad and you just deal with it. And when he does it, you expect it because that's what happens. It's to the point now with the offside call that you know you're going to get at least one of those a game from Laramie Tunsil. You just are. And if he protects, CJ's blind side and it doesn't kill them in a game, well, then okay, great. I don't mind the one call. Today was an epically bad day for Laramie Tunsil. The play in which you're talking about where, he's lining up in the backfield, it's so tough for me because I understand both sides of it. JJ Watt went, into very detail how he felt like that was an advantage for, the offensive line, that he was glad that the defense, him being a defensive player, this was like leveling the playing field, keeping them honest, keeping them on the line, because if they're allowed to start in the backfield, that's a head start basically for a lineman, so that they don't have to backpedal. They're already halfway there, because that's the advantage that you can gain as a defensive player, is to catch them backpedaling, not being able to set their feet. I do think that the league needs to do something about it, because it's ruining the flow. It's ruining games. I think the fact that we're sitting here watching this called 4, 5, and 6 times on the same guy, one thing that I liken it to, when you see a wide receiver line up on the line or off the line, he can signal to the line judge, hey, am I good? And the line judge will signal back, yeah, you're good. I feel like the lineman should be able to do that. Like, hey,
Yeah.
am I good where I am? And if he is, then let him play. And if not, tell him to get on the line, and then give him the courtesy, so we're not sitting here just giving free 5 yards every other play, because it seems like, depending on the officiating crew, I've seen 4 different games where they have just called this thing 5, 6, 7, 8 times. The 2 games that I've seen it where it was like really prevalent, it was just on one side of the ball. One team just got totally rung up over and over and over again. And as much as I understand both sides of it, help the player then, like, don't have him line there, and then we don't have this problem.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. That's actually, I didn't really think about it that way, but that's like pretty much the perfect comparison, is because like at all levels, the wide receiver, like I've coached at the junior Pee Wee level, and it's like one of the first things you teach the wide receiver is like, better check with the line judge, because otherwise, if we get illegal formation, that's on you. You got to check with him. So like if they start it that early and they're going to start enforcing this, the illegal formation the way that they are, then they better give the players some help, because like I'm looking at some of these plays and I'm like, that looks like a normal lineup, like that it's inconsistent the way it's called, and Titus Howard said as much. And yeah, I mean, I think it's just a detriment to things. And to speak to Laramie Tunsil, I mean, I agree with you that he is a great left tackle. And I mean, in my halftime observations during the game, I was like, if you feel like you need to, you could put Blake Fisher in instead, if you feel like he's going to give you a better chance and like not commit as many penalties. But at the end of the day, Laramie Tunsil is an elite left tackle at talent wise, and usually his penalties are not enough to literally negate the Texans' entire offense from functioning. The problem is that today that was the case. And I get it. At the end of the game, it's a 34-7 game, and the offense never really got going and all this. But like in a game that's so heavily affected by momentum and like the mental headspace of the players, when you go down 14-0 early on, it kind of puts you in a bad headspace. And all it takes is one play. I'll look back to this, right? The Texans playing the Bills in the 2019 playoffs. I remember vividly, I was watching it and it felt like the game was done. Like the Texans were out, the Bills were going to win it. And then JJ Watt, who had played through a pectoral injury, to literally show up, got that sack late in the game. And I looked to my dad. I remember I said, hey, that play changed the momentum. The Texans are going to win this game now. And they came back and won it. It was ugly, but I mean, they got back in there and did it. And so all it takes is one play. And when your left tackle is negating all those plays, it is severely detrimental. I don't want anyone to think that I'm like overstating it. I'm not. Like, it is the difference between the game when you take away a 30-yard Tank Dell reception, when you take away, I don't know, there's like just so many plays where I was like, oh, look, Nico Collins for 20, sweet, first down, that's momentum. And then it just rained away. And the offense goes to 3-and-out, and it sucks. It sucks all the energy out of the offense. But anyway, looking at, there's not really much else to talk about with the offense, because honestly, that sums it all up. CJ had some picks, and first one, like you said, maybe you go a different direction, but like if it's swatted at the line, not much you can say about his fault in that. And yeah, he was a little behind Nico on the second throw. We'll put that one on CJ for sure. But just I don't know. We've talked about turnover differential and how that affects the game. And regardless of fault, those 2 turnovers were huge in affecting how the Texans' chances were of coming back. And let's transition into the defensive half of this discussion and talk, because turnovers are a thing that the Texans were forcing a lot of, in at least a few of, in the first few games, and it felt like the defense kind of didn't really ever make that push to get any turnovers. What do you think the source of that is as to why that was not something they were able to do?
I think you got to start with the Minnesota Vikings. They had a great game plan. They really played within themselves. They didn't get too unique or wild or do anything that I thought was extravagant. They basically said our best guy is better than your best guy, and we move him around, and we're going to find a way to get Justin Jefferson the football, and we find a way to get Aaron Jones into space. And sometimes they threw it, and sometimes they ran it. They ran it to the edges. I think they did a really good job, and I think D'Amico said as much. He got out coached. I really didn't understand the reason the lack thereof with the coverage with respect to Justin Jefferson. I think you should have shadowed him with Derek Stingley Jr. I know that this fan base and this coaching team thinks the world of Kamari Lassiter. I just think that was a lot to ask of him. There was a couple plays that I felt he got beat on. There was a couple plays where I think, they played zone, and I don't think you can do that with a guy like Justin Jefferson unless you're going to bracket him. And I don't know that leaving Eric Murray on an island with him is a good idea. And these are things that I hope they go back to, the film, and they go, you know what? We're not going to do this with stud wide receivers. We're gonna play them differently. I get that philosophy matters, and okay, we need to be able to beat guys, beat teams, with our base stuff, and it doesn't matter who's out there. But there are some guys that you circle and you go, look, we can't let Justin Jefferson beat us. If Naylor beats us, so be it. If Munt beats us, so be it. But when we're allowing Aaron Jones and Justin Jefferson to beat us because they were pretty much the source of their offense, I got a problem with that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And we talked about different ways to do. Obviously, the most obvious answer to Justin Jefferson is just wherever he is, Derek Stingley is. There was other concepts thrown around, one of them being, you play your cornerback 2 and you give him help and double Justin Jefferson, and then have, Derek Stingley cover the wide receiver 2. And and with that, you would hope you could essentially take away their top 2 wide receivers and make them beat you with their wide receiver 3. Granted, there was plays where Naylor really it was impressive. I feel like we're past the point of talking about this offense as just a Sam Darnold and Justin Jefferson show. That was definitely how it started for the Vikings in this game. But once they do that, I guess it happened a little later in the game. That's, I guess, my deepest issue with it, is that at some point you have to look and go, wow, they're really lighting us up with Justin Jefferson. Maybe we should cover him. And it felt like the Texans took a really long time to realize that. And I think John Crumpler put it best. It seemed like the defensive game plan was basically to ignore the talent level of the other team and just play ball. And that worked against the Colts and the Bears, because the Colts and the Bears are the kind of team that's literally the game plan is just, oh, well, I don't know, maybe DJ Moore, I don't know, you have guys, but you can play that way, and the skill level of those teams will get in their own way and help you out. But you can't just not have a tailored game plan defensively and maybe it's this, right? I doubt it, but maybe the Texans were viewing the Vikings the way we did before the season. I talked about it extensively during our preview, and talked about it, throughout the preseason and throughout the offseason. We wrote off the Vikings. We said the Texans are probably a 6-0 team after week 6. The Vikings are not a team they should be concerned about. We consistently underestimated the Vikings, But I think both of us and most of the Texans fan base, by the time it came time to play them, were like, oh, Brian Flores can coach defense and Justin Jefferson is Justin Jefferson. And so Sam Darnold is not like, and Brandon K. Scott put it best. He said that we can't have Texans Twitter making analysis of wins and losses for the Texans based off who plays quarterback for the other team, because that's just not how it works. Sam Darnold's younger than Joe Burrow. Sam Darnold is a first-round pick who was picked really highly and should have had a better career, but just he was the number 3 pick, right? And just had the same problem that most top 5 picks at quarterback have. He went to a team that was not prepared to have a top 5 pick at quarterback. But what do you do when you are a no good franchise? You build around a top 5 pick at quarterback. And so, I mean, moving forward, as much as I'd like to say I've been guilty of it, I mean, I definitely was not one that was underestimating the Vikings. And I had a feeling all week going into that game that it could be a challenge for the Texans, but maybe the Texans didn't feel like that. But that's why, like I've said a couple times in the episode so far, the fact that they lost this game, I think, is important, and it's probably more beneficial to them than if they had squeaked out a win, just from what it can teach them. But looking at the defense as a whole, one thing that I'll say is that much like the Colts game, it kind of felt like the pass rush got there sometimes, but less like the Colts game. When they weren't getting sacks, it felt like they couldn't touch Sam Darnold. What do you make of that? Do you think it's a skill issue? Do you think the Vikings just game planned for this pass rush and like really held them? Because on the flip side, Jonathan Grenard looked like he could do no wrong because the Texans decided to block him with a tight end every single time, never failed. And I didn't understand that, but it looked like the Vikings knew what they were doing when they were handling the Texans D-line and the pass rush in general. What do you make of it?
I really, again, want to just tip my hat to the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, when you look at what they did with Jonathan Grenard, they moved him all over the field. And it wasn't like they just lined up and said, okay, this is our guy on the left, this is our guy on the right, and we're just going to come at you. Grenard got a sack coming through the middle. You know, he beat Shaq Mason really bad. Like you said, he beat Cade Stover really bad. These are advantages that I think Brian Flores looked to expose. He moved him around to get him in a position to win a matchup. And I guess something that maybe the Texans aren't trying to do is to do something like that, you know, where you're looking at stunts and stuff like that to get Will Anderson clean, to get Danielle Hunter clean, because they're just trying to work through guys and they're getting incredibly close. And the funny thing, you know, everybody wants to crown a winner in this, you know, basically Danielle Hunter for Jonathan Grenard trade that these two teams did. And I think that's really bad, you know, on a level of, well, one offensive line was elite today, you know, was able to do just enough and open holes so that, you know, their running back could run for 100 yards and they kept their quarterback clean enough to win a football game and to make plays. The other offensive line was just getting smoked at every level, whether it be in the run, in the pass, against, you know, the officiating, whatever the case. So I can't necessarily comment poorly on what Will Anderson and John Grenard, or not Will Anderson and John Grenard, Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter were doing, because there was too many times where you had a paw on Sam Darnold. He'd step up in the pocket and make a play. You know, whether it was Will Anderson or Danielle Hunter, they both almost got there so many times. And I feel like you, at that point, you kind of tip your cap to the Minnesota Vikings. I'm not going to tell you that Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter aren't good because they didn't get to the quarterback.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that they're, you know, if you look at Will Anderson for a lot of plays, I feel like it's been a thing this whole season where he's been being held like excessively, and he's not getting that call, which makes it more frustrating that we're super hyper focused on where Laramie Tunsil is lined up, but the, you know, Minnesota left tackle can just literally bear hug Will Anderson Jr. to prevent him from getting there, and then also the fact that even when the Texans did get there, Sam Darnold was like agile. He was moving, ducking and dodging and getting the ball out and making good throws was the main thing. And so it's just hard. And we've talked all offseason. I feel like that's my catchphrase. We've talked all offseason about this, but I need to remind the viewers that we were pretty in tune with the fact that the Texans were going to live or die by their pass rush defensively. And with a pass rush, even when you're getting sacks, if most plays of the game, because we've also talked about that, where all it takes is one stat and everyone's like, wow, Will Anderson Jr. had a sack. What a great game from Will Anderson Jr. And it's like, yeah, I mean, and he was being held and all that. And I'm not trying to, like you said, I'm not trying to talk down that they didn't have a good game, but like the pass rush needed to be like the standard that was set for what was needed from the pass rush based off the other levels of the defense and where they are at is pretty high, and it wasn't met. And so when you don't get to Sam Darnold and you don't bring him to the ground more often, or at least put him under enough pressure to make him throw poorly and not be, because if you put it in the stratosphere of Justin Jefferson, he's going to catch it. You have to make Sam Darnold literally not able to get it within like, the Earth's atmosphere of Justin Jefferson. Otherwise, Jefferson's going to, we saw that. There was so many catches from Jefferson, even Naylor, where I was like, man, like Darnold put it just where it needed to be, or even if it was close, they made it work, right? And so, I mean, this Texans pass rush, like I said, we're going to live and die by it, and we died by it this week. So I'm hopeful, like you said, because there was a play, I believe on Will Anderson Jr.'s sack, he stunted inside and came right through the middle from the left side to get Sam Darnold. So obviously you're onto something with that, and I don't know why we're not. It felt like a lot of the plays were just, okay, get after it, charge the outside and see what happens. We're going to play hard-nosed, smash-mouth football. And then they got their noses and mouths smashed trying to do that and couldn't get back there. So it's frustrating to say the least. Did you have any observations from the linebacker group and how they played?
I mean, I thought Al-Shaair played really well. I know there was some tackles he made that I was like, I felt like he was where he needed to be. I know we've talked a lot about Jalen Petrie being, one of the linebacking core, so to speak. And I feel like there was a couple plays where he was just out of position because they're asking him to be all over the field right now. And I don't know that you can ask him to be a safety and a linebacker and a safety and a linebacker and a safety and a linebacker. And I know he's young and he's really talented. And I think like there has to be spells, right? And there was a play where he got a pass interference and, he'd been up on the line the entire time. And then they sent this tight end out and he just bear hugged him because I honestly don't know if he knew he had help over the top. If you get into that play, you see Derek Stingley Jr. over the top. And, it's just a lot on a guy's plate to, decipher, I think. And maybe I'm just not willing to be extra critical of Jalen Petrie or whatever. But I tend to think that the linebackers didn't play poorly. I just think that, it was one of those games where they weren't necessarily the focus because you only saw them really attack the middle of the field a couple times where, I thought the secondary just struggled mightily to do anything with Justin Jefferson or Naylor. And that's really the story of that.
Yeah, I know that play you're talking about with Petrie, and it's funny too because it felt like that ball wasn't even catchable. Maybe it's because of what Petrie did, but it felt like it was out of reach, and it didn't feel like what Petrie did affected it. But I mean, it's close enough that you're going to get that. I felt like that was going to be the call the second that I saw it, as much as the replay tried to convince me otherwise. But I agree with you with this. I think I think the linebacker room did solid. And I think that Jalen Petrie in the role that he's in looks a lot better when the pass rush is there. It looks a lot better when the defense, like they on that touchdown to Justin Jefferson, where Eric Murray slipped and didn't cover him. If you look at that play, he was in coverage for almost 7 seconds. Covering Justin Jefferson for 7 seconds is like flying to the moon on a Tesla Roadster. Like, not going to happen. You're going to need more rocket fuel to get up there because you're not going to do it. I mean, I don't know. And nothing against, like, I was very critical of the decision to have Eric Murray on Justin Jefferson, but because I saw it 3 times in the first 5 minutes of the game, and that to me was an indicator of the defense not understanding what they were facing in terms of Justin Jefferson and his talents. But I mean, Justin Jefferson's been underestimated this whole offseason. Just look at his ADP in fantasy. One of the best, if not the best wide receivers in the league. I saw him go in the second round in one of the drafts that I was in. That was wild. That was an outlier, though. I don't think that was a trend worth noting. But one more thing to talk about. It's defensive, but it's not necessarily related to the Texans game directly. Maybe it's the game, but I don't know. Anyway, Steven Nelson quoted a couple of my tweets, but he was on a tirade on Twitter and on Instagram, just really going in on the Texans' performance. Do you have anything to say on that? He posted a picture of Milk Duds. He was very critical of his former team. Said that that the Texans forced players to play with injuries last year, and that to lose this early on is an indicator of a season that's going to be worse than last year, because if you're already losing in games where you have healthy players, all that and another. But what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know what Steven Nelson hopes to accomplish. Like, if he just wants to go after those guys just for the sake of going after those guys, I guess he can, but if he wants to be in the league again, if I'm another team, am I signing up for that? No. Like he just comes off as a really bitter, really hurt individual that, clearly thought higher of himself, and the Texans didn't feel that way. And this is him lashing out. And I guess you're entitled to your opinion. You can say whatever you want, but if I'm a guy that still thinks he can play in the league, which I feel like he does, and want to get another job, want to get another run somewhere else, over there undressing a team after a loss, when I really didn't hear him say anything in the first two games. I didn't see any Twitter quotes of his or anything like that the first two games. Kind of just looks like, somebody being a little petty, somebody being a little bitter, and it's not good for your resume.
Yeah, he's waiting in the wings to prey on a team's downfall. He looks like me on Twitter with receipts after a team's talk trash. And I think that's another thing to say is that I didn't get any receipts from Vikings fans before the game. So that may have been an indicator of them being humble, knowing that they were going to win. Every other team so far this season, the Bears and the Colts, have talked massive trash. And maybe I just wasn't looking in the right places, but I couldn't find any receipts. So I had nothing to, but after each of the wins, the first thing I do is go into my bookmarks and go update. Wow. Update. That's the go-to. But, yeah, I don't know. He retired. I think that maybe he wants to stay retired, or maybe he's just not thinking about the possibility of being offered enough money to want to come back to it. I couldn't, I don't know. If I did that with, I would have trouble finding employment if I trash talked my previous employer very loudly and publicly, without any basis, or maybe with some basis. But obviously, like you said, there's some teams that are going to be like, do we want that in the room? Maybe not. And so I like you said, I don't get what he's trying to accomplish with it. But yeah, this was a no fun, absolutely no good week of football, day of Houston sports. At least the Dynamo went out and got a win against Austin. That was fun because there was this Austin FC podcast that was like, the best team in Texas is going to win tonight. And then
they did.
that happened. It just wasn't the way that they foresaw that happening. And so shout out to the Dynamo for holding it down while the Texans took a week off from that. So next week, the Texans play against the Jaguars. There'll be a giveaway for 2 tickets to that game. I'm putting it together. I'm thinking I might do it on Instagram and Twitter, but at least on Twitter for sure. So if you want to go to that game, make sure you enter. Make sure you tell a bunch of friends so they can enter, and possibly you can be their second friend that they bring to the game. And make sure we fill up NRG and get loud, because apparently the Vikings did that and it adversely affected the Texans. So, all right. Well, as always, you have been listening to The Bullpen, and I have been James Roy. You can find me at James Roy NFL on Twitter and at N1 Texans Fan on Instagram. Tom is TC Tom1 on Instagram and Third Coast Tom on Twitter. And the Bullpen's pages are all the Bullpen Cast. So make sure you follow and keep up with us through there. And you can find us wherever you get podcasts, as I said at the beginning of the episode. Thanks for tuning in. As always, stay classy, Houston, and vamos Texans. Thanks for tuning into The Bullpen, a Texans podcast. Please like, comment, subscribe, and follow along for more Texans talk from The Bullpen.